Welcome to Empowerment Point TV, everybody, where we bring business experts to business owners to help you have better and better businesses. Have you ever wanted to start a podcast, or you're already running a podcast and you just want to make it better and better? Well, this is definitely the show for you. So welcome on board, guys. My name's Debbie Small and I'm the founder of Empowerment Point, and you can watch other episodes of Empowerment Point TV on my YouTube channel called Empowerment Point TV. So enjoy and also subscribe so you get to know what's coming up as well. Now, I wanted to welcome you to Business Dining with Deb, Business Treats and Takeaways. This is episode 7. I can't believe we're already on episode 7, which is great. So use podcasting to grow your business and to grow your brand, which is really, really important. And as you can see, we've tweaked our show, so I would love to have these ladies over for a dinner party. However, we are doing it on Zoom like everybody else at the moment. So our sponsor for tonight is the very lovely, or my good friend Nikki's lovely, lovely mother Anna and her friend Hannah. So I need to let you know what we have for tonight, and it's all home cooked meals made with love. So I thank you very, very much, ladies, for a beautiful meal. So let's see if we can show this or not, if I can bring this down over here. We have pea, leek, zucchini and mint soup, which is going to be absolutely delicious. And I'm going to do all the food at the moment because that way I can eat as we go. Over here, can we see that? Oh, we can. We have lamb shoulder seasoned with white wine, celery, onion, carrot and rosemary. Roasted vegetables in olive oil with sweet potatoes and red pepper. Yum! Okay, now here we go, guys. Over here, can you see that? Does that look absolutely stunning? That is called an Eton mess, which is frangelico soaked berries with smashed meringue. And I don't think I've smashed them, but anyway, smashed meringue and vanilla whipped cream. And this is absolutely beautiful. I've already been licking the whipped cream, so it's absolutely yum. Okay, ladies, what do you have for dinner tonight?
I've got roast veggies.
Oh, yum.
Yeah, leftovers from last night, I'm afraid.
Leftovers is always delicious, always. And Annemarie, what have you got?
Well, I would have had, because I had it on a nice little plate waiting for me, and my son came home and ate it. Although I did have an earlier sampling. So it was steak, roast vegetables like Melanie, so pumpkin and potato, and then just the standard broccoli and cauliflower and carrots.
Yeah. So are you having dinner with us?
Oh, I ate some earlier, but my son ate the second meal. So
okay.
Drinking a cup of
Fair enough. Now, just to let everybody know that I have a track sheet with me, so that way we keep us all on track. We make sure to cover all the important information for you as well. And I have my good friend Nikki, who's virtually plugged in from her home. And she'll be looking through your questions and looking through your comments. So make sure that you do put your questions down because we can answer them live. And make sure you put your comments down as well. So a big hello to Nikki as well. And I think it's time to start our dinner party and for me to introduce these lovely ladies to you. So let's start. I have with us Annemarie Cross. Now, Annemarie is the CEO and founder of Ambitious Entrepreneur Podcast Network, Industry Thought Leader Academy, and the author of Industry Thought Leader, How to Go from Invisible to Influential and Profitable with a Podcast. Dubbed the Podcasting Queen, she's recognized as a pioneer in this space, having started her first podcast in 2008. Seems like yesterday, but not, huh?
Yes.
Since then, she has interviewed thousands of guests, produced hundreds of episodes, won multiple awards, has been listed among the top podcast lists for entrepreneurs and small businesses worldwide. And Annemarie has helped her podcast syndicated on both national and international radio. She now works with experts who feel like the world's best kept secret, there's a few of those, cut through the noise, build their reach and their reputation as an authority, and build their revenue as they begin to nurture listeners into leads and ultimately paying clients from their very first episode. welcome Annemarie.
Thank you, Deb.
That's all right.
Yeah.
And then we have also the lovely Melanie Colling. Melanie Colling is the founder of Purpose Driven Projects and the co-founder of Experts on Air, podcast booking agency. She's the host of the Business Connections podcast and Amazon International best-selling co-author of You Are a Genius. Well, thank you, Melanie. I appreciate that. Melanie is a successful entrepreneur, mum of one, avid podcast listener, voracious business book reader, loves meeting new people and learning about what they do and why they do it. And she just can't help connecting people and having fun. Sounds good. She is passionate about helping business leaders and experts succeed and accelerate their businesses by developing valued connections to become leaders in their field, industry, and or niche. Melanie believes entrepreneurs will make the change in the world we want to see and need, not governments. So true. So she is committed to supporting and connecting entrepreneurs to empower change. This is why she gets up every morning. Welcome, Mel.
Thanks, Deb. Thanks for having me.
My absolute pleasure. So the first thing I want to ask you, lovely ladies, is what are some common mistakes that people make around podcasting?
You want to go first, Melanie? I'll jump in.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I eat my soup.
Great question, Deb. So a couple of things that people, in my opinion, people make when podcasting is they get caught up in the technology or a bit overwhelmed with, oh my God, you know, it's too technical and I need a microphone and a whole lot of things, editing software, when actually you don't need a whole lot of stuff, and podcasting is quite easy to start. So you can start simple and then you can get a bit more complicated and complex as and when you need to, and if you want to go down that path. So that's probably the first thing I'd say. The next thing I'd say is around not having a strategy, so not knowing why podcast. You need to know why you're doing it. And that links into the third point, which is around knowing who you want to speak to and who you want to connect with. So who's your audience? Who do you want to connect with via your podcast? Who are you speaking to when you get in front of the microphone and record your podcast? And then the fourth thing that I would say is just not starting. A lot of people say, oh, I want to start a podcast, and they never do it. And
trying to be perfect, which doesn't actually exist.
Exactly. And you know what? When we all look back on the things we did earlier in our careers or our first podcasts, and Annemarie can probably talk to this, and when we first did videos and things like that, we look back and think, oh my gosh, what were we doing? But it's only that when we started, we got better because we knew what we could improve because we were in action and we were doing it. So I would just encourage everybody just to have a go.
No, very true. And it's also true what you said, that people focus, because I've heard this a lot, and I'm pretty sure I've heard this around networks that Annemarie, you and I have been part of too, that have asked this to you as well, that people are so worried about the tools that they actually forget that you do need a strategy and you need things like that as well. And you need to know what you're doing and where you're going with your podcast. Before we do go on to strategy, Annemarie, is there anything that you want to add in regards to the mistakes that people make?
Yeah, those are all really good points that Melanie mentioned. And I think what I also see happening is that then they think, well, okay, my strategy is I want to do this, this, and this, but they don't go deep enough because of all of the time and energy and effort. And I know both Debbie and Melanie with your podcast, there's a lot of time that goes on behind the scenes, a lot of in some instances hours of work, of research, putting it together by the time you post produce and get it out there. So you really want to make sure that the strategy, and we're going to talk about it in a moment, really does lead you down the path of where you want to end up. And so there's a couple of things that I really stress, and that includes the message. Is it targeted to your niche? Because so often, and I've been in this, and I've made every single mistake and then some over the last 11 plus years. And one of the biggest mistakes was not getting so clear on that message and then saying, how am I going to monetize that? Because I assumed that people would listen to my podcast. The first one we were co-hosted, so we were in the hair industry. People would listen and then they would go to my website, see all of their credentials and go, wow, I want to work with Annemarie. but that never happened because assumption, and when you base your strategy on hope that people will do that, is not often the case. And many of us are also consumers of podcasts, and we listen when we're driving. So how often do you listen to something you think, oh, I'm going to make a note of that when I get back to the office, and then someone cuts in front of you or life just happens and then so you never follow up. So, you know, your strategy has to have all of the touch points and taking people on that next step so that it's just not, you know, left to chance.
Okay, so first of all, I have to say this soup is absolutely delicious. So thank you so much for that. It is yum. Second thing I want to say is let's have a look at the strategy. What's the very first thing someone should look at when they're about to do a podcast? Their very first thing.
The end in mind.
Okay.
You can't plot where you're going or a strategy unless you know where you want to go.
Okay, so what would the end in mind be? Because I know some people think, oh, I want to give information to people or I want to help people with something, but there's more to the end than just that, isn't there?
What are you monetizing? If you're a coach or a consultant, what is the product or service or expertise, the program that you want to seed and lead? Because that is very much going to determine the content. It's going to determine the structure, the format. It's going to determine the calls to action, everything, because every component in your podcast is going to add value. It's going to educate, it's going to engage, and it's going to entice someone to want to take that next step. But unless you know what that next step is, you can't build a strategy around that.
Okay, so educate and engage. Those two things are very, very important with that as well. Okay, so the first thing really to find out who's your market, who's your niche market that you're actually doing your podcast for, and what is your outcome in mind. So what is it that you're wanting to monetize? What are you wanting to do as your call to action at the end of that? And then your podcast should be structured in a way that you're actually talking a bit about what's at the end as well.
Yeah, and also, you know, the topics that you share on your show, whether you are lecturing yourself, so it's a solo show, or whether you're interviewing someone, has to add value around the topic or subtopics that you know your ideal client is struggling with. That's another mistake that I made and one of the reasons I closed down my award-winning, you know, the podcast that you said was often listed in the top 3, it still is getting attention. I shut it down because it was called Ambitious Entrepreneur Show and it was too diverse. So I'm niching now into the Industry Thought Leader podcast, far more niched, far more, you know, outcome driven. And so, yeah, every single component, every single topic, every single guest, if you have guests, has to add value to that common theme and where you really want to position yourself. Back when I started, there weren't as many podcasts, obviously, as there is now, which means that we have to get so clear on this because there could be so many people speaking into your specific topic, but you want to have the angle that you bring to the table, to the airwaves, you know, in this instance.
Okay, so once we know our topic, we know the strategy that we're using in regards to it. When you talk about, I have written here, the message is important. Now, is this your overall message? Is this your messaging at the end? When you say your message is really important, yes, your message is important, but how do you actually put that into your podcast to make sure that it's succinct all the way through?
Often you have to provide context. So, I mean, I'll give myself, and jump in, Melanie. I don't want to hog the microphone. I'm kind of passionate.
Please jump in.
But just give mine, for example, you know, Industry Thought Leader podcast, helping you go from invisible to influential. And so all of my guests have to provide value into that topic. Now, I have to, at the beginning of the show, introduce why it's relevant. So whether I'm talking to someone who is a thought leader and we're going to cover the steps, the insights, you know, the mistakes they made and all that to help people, or it might be a service or a product that someone is speaking about that's going to help someone along their journey of becoming known as that thought leader. So I need to be able to segue and be able to provide context as to why it's relevant, you know, otherwise people are going to go, well, that's not relevant for me, and off they go, they won't listen any further. But then every single question that you ask has to provide a response that adds value, so that, you know, your guest or yourself is not going off topic, because you can easily lose someone's attention. You know, we've got so much content vying for our ideal client's attention. We want to make sure that it's consistently valuable for them.
Very true. And that's also, I think, why I have a track sheet that I go through as well, to make sure that we cover everything we need to cover, because when you're talking to passionate people, it's really easy to keep talking and talking about different things to do with the topic as well. And I always say on my show that, well, there's no chef today, but I always say that if I didn't have a track sheet, that our chef would be making breakfast in the morning. Or maybe Nikki's mum would come back and make breakfast in the morning.
On the couch.
Yeah, nice.
That's it. Melanie, what would you like to add in regards to strategy?
Yeah, like Annemarie, it's like the first thing that you've got to think of is why you're doing it. And I usually ask the 5 questions. So why you're doing it, what you talk about, like what's your topic, your call to action, who are you talking to, which is your audience, and then your when and your how is, you know, how are you going to bring all those topics in to your podcast, and what's your structure, you know, when are you going to talk about it, what's the rhythm of your podcast. And really, a lot of people ask me, and Annemarie, you might get the same question, is how do I monetize my podcast? And actually, that's the wrong way. People are thinking it the wrong way round. They should know how they make money in their business, and their podcast is a lead to that. So it's like the funnel that we all know, your podcast at the top, and you're leading people to your paid service.
So it's a marketing tool.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And as long as you know that that's the end game, like Annemarie said, we work backwards, and then you can curate your content to take people on that journey to, and what you're doing on a podcast is that you're building up trust with the people.
Yes.
Because they can hear you. That's a different form of connection than actually when people are reading something. It's very hard to get your personality across in written form. But when people can hear you on a podcast, they get to hear your personality. They get to know a little bit more about you, especially when you're interviewing someone, your personality comes out in that way. And they feel this different level of connection with you, that they trust you a little bit more to keep going with you on that journey. And so that's a really important part of podcasting, is to take that people on that journey and get that connection. And that's why podcasting is so powerful, because you are able to speak to people, they get to know you, and they want to hear more from you. Like, they're waiting for your next episode because they're like, oh, I really like what they're talking about.
So what do you see is the difference, or both of you actually, what do you see is the difference between podcasting and doing something like this, a video? Because for me, it was, okay, so this is more visual, and podcasting is like you hear it, you listen to it, but there's more to it, isn't there?
It's interesting because when you look at listenership of podcasting, main course, when you look at the listenership of podcasting, that is increasing, and the usage of social media is decreasing. And so what we find with podcasting is that people can do it while they're doing something else. So they can listen to it traveling to and from work, more isolation. They can listen to it while exercising, while they're taking the kids to sports or activities. You know, there's many places that they can listen to a podcast while they're doing other things. So therefore it's a lot more accessible. Whereas someone has to watch a video, they can't do that while they're multitasking, because that would be quite dangerous. So it's more accessible. People can just pop on a podcast. There's different points of where people will listen. So the length of the podcast is important too. Different lengths.
What's a good length of a podcast?
So content only, and Annemarie, you'd probably jump in here too, because you probably know a bit more too, between 8 and 12 minutes for information sharing. So you're just talking about a piece of content, you know, around 40, 45 minutes for an interview, depending on who you're interviewing. You know, you could go to an hour if you've got someone that's super interesting and you think that the interview is flowing. So depending on the type of podcast, depends on how long people will listen. So yeah, it's just different, and people can listen to a podcast, you know, rather than a video at work, for example. So yeah, we just find it a lot more accessible, where people will pick up a podcast before they will go to video.
Isn't it interesting how much it's actually growing?
Oh, it's phenomenal. There's 850,000 podcasts.
Yeah, actually,
Wow.
there's over 1 million now.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I just
Crazy.
about a couple of months ago, I think it was over 900,000 on even on Apple. But I just did some recent ones from Roy Morgan because I'm doing a presentation tomorrow, and it's interesting because the increase in listenership in the listenership from 2015 to now in Australia has been 216%, and apparently Victoria is the highest state of downloads. So
Victorians just love to keep learning.
Um,
Victorians just love to keep learning.
So, but just on what Melanie was saying, that's great. About different lengths of podcasts. I always say to people, how long is a piece of string? And that goes back to what both Melanie and I were saying at the beginning, is that you really have to understand your ideal client and understand their preferences, understand their likes and dislikes, and how long they typically will be able to spend listening to your podcast. So I've got some clients who work with mums, and pre-COVID-19, they were dropping their kids off at school, picking them up and so forth, and they knew they only had a short amount of time. So it was short, concise, here's something for you, and then off they would go. I've got some who work in the corporate space, so a lot of C-suites, executives, and so they only typically, 20 minutes. And so it differs. I had one person who was a videographer, and he said, I love 40 minutes because that's how long it takes me to mow the lawn, and I like a 40-minute bath. Said too much information, thanks. But anyway, thanks, Steve. It depends. It really depends. But what I say to people is use it as an opportunity to be able to reach out to your audience and say, give me feedback. But you know what? There are no rules in podcasting other than the rules that you put yourself, and other than the rules that, you are fed back from your ideal clients, your audience. So ask them, and do a number of different shows. Some might be 10 minutes, 15, others might go longer.
Yeah, and then you can have a look at your downloads and see which ones are more popular with your audience. Like, you can start tracking it, and then you get a feel for it and give more of that and less of something else that's not working. So, you learn as you go.
Sorry, Mel, can you talk a little bit more into the microphone? You sound like you're a little bit far away.
Shall I put my headphones on? Hang on.
Sorry.
Okay. Is that better, Deb?
Oh, hello.
Oh,
Now we also talked about how your message is important and how it fits into your business. I would have assumed that most businesses, a podcast would fit in quite well. Is that not right, or?
Well, it depends, because if I think of one client who's launched a podcast recently, she was quite, as I think Melanie works with a lot of experts too, and specialists. Because of their diverse expertise, there are a number of different clients who they could support and can support, which is one of the reasons why Melanie and I have said you need to identify what the outcome is. Because if I think of this particular client, she said, look, I can do this, I can target this, I can talk about this. So I said to her, what do you want to do? What is, if you had one action that your ideal client who is listening to your podcasts would do, what would that action be? She said, buy my software. And instantly she went from this opportunities to this, and we realized your target market are professionals, experienced people who are going to buy the software. Beginners, they might be interested, but they're dabbling. They don't want your content or your software yet. So we can and instantly was able to narrow down the focus. So that enabled us to really shape her introduction, because these professionals would be wanting to know credibility. Who is she? What is the credibility in the market? The name of the podcast, the introduction, everything, and the content. Everything is, actually, she's using her podcast as a way to explain how her software works, which is really interesting because it's working. She's consistently getting, increased download. Who would have thought? You would have thought it would be best on video, but these people are loving, listening to it. And that message was determined now and makes it easy for her to come up with topics, because she's now identified it's the professionals and I want to sell my software to them, and they're the people who are going to be interested in learning more.
That's really interesting, Annemarie, because I think, like you said, we both work with experts and they know this much, don't they? And it's like, oh, talk about this. And it's like, no, talk about this. And they can go in various different ways. And they've probably got multiple products and multiple different marketing strategies and different ways that they create content for their business. And really podcasting's making them make that decision about, okay, who are you talking to and what do you want them to do ultimately, and then take them on that journey.
Yeah. So it's really about a customer journey, isn't it?
It is that customer journey. And just getting back to that client with the software, I said it doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to speak to your, the people who are just newbies, because they may be very interested in buying the product down the track. But here's what I think a lot of people do, business owners do when we're marketing, and this just doesn't just relate to podcasts, but with any marketing strategy, they go in, they jump in, not really thinking what's the outcome that I want, and they spread themselves too thin, and it doesn't really work. You're not really leveraging. And one of my mentors years ago told me about the strategy called tip of the spear, and it's a warfare strategy where if you're trying to pierce through your enemy's barracks, you've got to send in a small team who make their way in, and then once they're in, then you can, and you've made that kind of breakthrough, then you can send people in through that. So how that relates to your message, you've got to get so clear, you've got to speak into that, become known as the whatever, so that people start to recommend you, people start to refer you. And so once you do that, then you can open up and add a little bit more, value and talk about more things, your expertise. But you've got to start off with that real clear niche, real clear message, so you become known as that person. Then you open up to other avenues, but you've got to provide context as to why it's relevant.
Okay, no, that's really good and very important information, because as business owners, we do forget that, and we forget how important our niche is as well. And I think at the moment we forget that too, because of COVID-19. We want to help the people in our niche, but we also want to help others who need help at the moment as well. So for me, I find the lines are a little blurred at the moment, which doesn't always make it the easiest when you're trying to do a strategy. But strategy is imperative to being on brand and also to growing your brand.
Yeah, it is. And I learned the hard way, as I remember when we first started podcasting, my co-host and I, we were using social media, and Facebook had only just come about. Twitter had only just come about. My co-host then went on. He still is very well known in the Twitter sphere. And a lot of my colleagues, business owners in the local area, were seeing how we were using this technology, because it was quite new. And they would say to me, can you come and speak? And of course, I wanted to help, just like you, Deb. You want to provide support and give any information so that they can learn and adapt or adopt. But what ended up happening was, back then I was podcasting, but it certainly wasn't the main business. I was business coaching and branding, positioning. But what ended up happening was people started talking about me about, you need to go see Annemarie about social media. That was not a service.
Oh.
So I ended up creating a name and a reputation for myself about social media. So when people came to me and said, can we work with you? I said, well, no, because I don't offer that service. So it was a huge lesson, because even one of my colleagues went and hired a business coach about branding and everything. She goes, hang on a minute, don't you do that? She said, I'm so sorry, I forgot, because you're talking about social media all the time. So that was a lesson that I thought I've got to be careful. Even though I may be able to speak into that, it's not going to serve my brand or my reputation, because I could be spreading myself too thin.
And that's also a really great story in regards to showing that what do you want to be known for?
Yes.
Yeah, it's really important to get your story right, and, get really specific about that, because, otherwise, what's the saying? If you're known for everything, you're known for nothing. You're too broad. And like Annemarie said, be known for one thing, and then you can be known for other things. But nail that one thing, get known, you know, and then you can build on it.
Okay.
So for you, Deb, you can help those other people, but just later.
Do it behind the scenes. Don't tell anyone.
Yeah.
Now I just want to have a bit of a talk. We'll come back to being clear on your brand and your podcast titles and all of that. But I just want to talk for a moment on being a guest on other people's podcasts. So tell me a bit about that.
Awesome. So like Annemarie's story, actually, Brett and I were working, Brett's my business partner in Experts on Air, Brett Jarman, and he was helping people create their own podcast. And his people were saying, oh, how do I get good guests on my podcast? Like, that's kind of taken me a lot of time and it's not really, you know, my thing. You know, you genuinely, you know, usually exhaust your personal network, like, you know, you have friends or people that you know, and then you like need to go beyond that for your podcast as you keep going. And then other people were coming to me saying, oh, you know, I've heard you on podcasts. How did you do that? Like, how did you get on other podcasts? So it naturally happened that we started to help people do that. So we created the podcast guest bookings agency. And the cool thing is that, you know, when people talk about podcasting, they think they've got to create their own podcast, and they don't necessarily need to do that to, you know, harness the power of podcasting. They can actually go and be on someone else's podcast and be interviewed. If you're interviewed on someone else's podcast, that host is inviting you to come and speak to their audience. So it's like speaking on stage, you know, and if that audience has, you know, 50, 100, couple of hundred listeners, then you've got an audience of that many too, and you've been invited there as an expert in a particular field, niche, topic, whatever the host wants you to talk on. So you're trusted automatically in that audience and that network, which is pretty cool. And then you're seen as an expert in that field. Then you can take that podcast and you can actually use that for your marketing as well. So that's your collateral that you can create social media collateral off and post it on different platforms to say, hey, I was a guest on this podcast, and you can start leveraging the host's audience, and then the host leverages yours as well. And so it's a way of connecting and collaborating together to help build each other.
And you can even turn it into a blog as well.
Absolutely,
a newsletter. Other means that you want to.
Yep, absolutely. So if you do a couple of those, and you know, you'll start getting known for being a good guest, and other podcast hosts know each other, so you know they talk to each other, and you can get referred.
We're all an incestuous bunch.
Yeah, that's right. We all know each other. We're pretty friendly.
We are. Now, you also talked in regards to mixing people with podcasters. So what do you look for when you mix people and podcasters?
It's really the audience. So we work with the guest, and like we were saying before, who do you want to speak in front of? Like who do you want to attract to your business? Who's your target market? And then finding hosts that speak to that same target market. Now, it might be in the same industry field niche, but it might be somewhere else. So, you know, if you're an entrepreneur and you can talk about branding, for example, that can go across any industry. So you can look for podcasts in multiple industries to speak on, because your topic is broad across industries. So don't just like narrow your field and say, oh, you know, I have to talk in a particular niche. You can actually find hosts with your audience. And I think that's the key, is how can you find the audience? But then what you're doing with that host is that you're adding value to the host and to their audience. You're not selling anything, you're just adding value, and you're giving your expertise freely. People are getting to know you, understand what you do, then they'll go and find you. You know, you've got show notes, the host will have links and things to you. You know, people will come and find you once they get to know you and hear you on a podcast.
All about giving value.
Yeah.
Mel, you also have a podcaster's kit. What's in a podcaster's kit?
So for the guest booking agency, we actually have a profile sheet, which in the industry is kind of like a speaker's kit if you're a speaker, a professional speaker. So it's really, we put it together for our guests. So it's a headshot, your bio, what audiences you can speak to. So, you know, are you targeting C-suite executives, or are you targeting entrepreneurs, business leaders, or are you targeting mumpreneurs, for example? And then we do what we call talking points. So we kind of work with the guest to find out what topics they can talk on, excuse me, and what it's things that will tweak the interest of a host. So it might be 5 things you didn't know about branding that you need to know today. You know, a host will get that and go, oh gosh, I really want to know the answers to that question. I need to go and interview Annemarie, for example. So you want to pique the interest of the host, but you also want the host to go, oh, that would be really valuable to know the answer to that question from my audience. So we kind of, you know, create those. And so it's a one-sheet guest profile that we use to go out and, match hosts and guests together.
Fantastic. Oh, excuse me. Thank you for that. Now, just before I'm about to go on to talk about your podcast title and how important that is. But just before we do, let me just see if I can get Nikki back on to see if there are any comments or questions. We lost her. We lost her on the internet somewhere. We lost you. Okay. Okay. All right. Sorry, guys. We've lost Nikki. That's okay. We love the internet. Just like to say hi to Jeff, who's watching. Lucia was watching as well, and Kiki as well. Hello, guys. We don't have any questions at the moment, and hopefully we can get Nikki up. Oh, hello, we do. We've got her up. Okay, one moment, guys. We got you back. Oh, no, she's connecting. Say hi to got you back. Watching. Lucia was watching as well. And that's my voice.
She's got Facebook Live on.
Hopefully we can get Nikki up. Oh, hello, we do.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Oh my God.
You need to have it on silent when you come through because we're a bit in front of Facebook. That's all right.
Yeah.
How are you? You got on. Cool.
I got on finally. I've been watching very closely.
Do we have any other comments or any other questions?
We've got no comments, but we've got no questions, but we've got a comment from Christine Hall. Well done.
Great. Thank you and hello.
Okay. And so now I'm going to stay logged on, but I don't know what happened there, but we're all good now.
That's all right. I'm going to put you into the waiting room and we'll see what happens. Hopefully you'll stay on. If not,
okay,
we'll just come back on again.
No worries
Thank
at
you.
all. I'm right here.
And tell your mum the food's delicious, so thank you.
Okay. All right. No worries. Thanks, Dal.
Okay, we are back. All right, so what I wanted to talk about is your podcast title. How important is that and what do we need to look at or do with our title?
So the name of your podcast, do you mean, Deb?
Yeah, I guess your name of your podcast episode title, yeah.
Yeah. So I'll jump in. The name of your podcast, I really recommend if I'm working with a client to consider a number of things. Obviously, the outcome, we identify that. What is it that you want? So positioning for them. Looking also at your audience, your ideal client, what outcome do they want? Or what are they seeking, actively seeking and interested in? And then we also look at, what are some of the top keywords or some of the phrases that are very much synonymous and where you want to position yourself with. And then a combination of that very much can guide you into picking the right, selecting the right name for your podcast. Now, I'll give you an example. I was working with a client who had a CEO, who he was the CEO of a business, but he had an SEO team working with him, and they'd identified a number of keywords that their, blog strategy, their content strategy would be positioning him for. And when I had a look at the name of his business and the industry we're in, we were able to weave some of the words together and come up with with a beautiful statement that was very outcome driven, outcome focused, but would also position him, you know, very highly in the keywords. So we really looked at those things. And, you know, one of the things that I tend to encourage people to avoid is stay away from the creative, fancy, smancy kind of titles. It's like, you know, when someone introduces themselves at a networking event and you listen to them speak and you think after 30 seconds, 45 seconds, I have no idea what you do.
People don't realise how keeping it simple is so important.
Yeah. And so, you know, and just one other point, and I'm sure Melanie will share some things too. You know, you see some people who have their name, which is great, but just think if you're creating an asset that you create your podcast around, and that's your business, and so you could sell that down the track. When I said that I was closing down or stopping production of Ambitious Entrepreneur Show, I had multiple messages to say, would I consider selling that? Now, if I'd called that the Annemarie Cross Show, there's no way, unless someone else is called Annemarie Cross, looks like me, sounds like me, could take over that. So just be, again, what's the end in mind? Are you creating an asset that you could sell down the track? Or do you really want to have it at your name because you're building your own personal brand?
So does that mean I stuffed it with Business Dining with Deb?
Unless there's someone else who loves dining and whose name's Deb.
Yeah, it's all good. But that's so true, because again, a podcast title is searchable. So what are people searching for? What are they going to be looking for? You know, when they're looking through the 1 million podcasts to find your podcast. So how are you going to stand out from there, and how are you going to attract that audience that you really want? So one of my tips is, like, think about your avatar. So who is that person that you're talking to, and what are they, put yourself in their shoes, and what are they going to be searching for when they go looking for a podcast? You know, and kind of think in those terms about, when you're naming it.
I did all right with the episode title. Use podcasting to grow your brand. So there's a number of keywords in there.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay, so our name is really important. So we need to really look at, you know, keywords and what people are going to look up to find it as well. What about the introduction?
Very important.
Yeah.
So there's kind of two introductions. There's the like the formal introduction, and I always keep a bit of a formal introduction, especially because it kind of creates that stage. You know, Melanie said a podcast is really your virtual stage, which it is. And so you've got your introduction, and everything speaks your brand, you know, from the music, it creates an ambience, creates an experience. And then of course you've got the intro, where as the host you come in and you will share what you're talking about. And I remember listening to a show, this is many years ago, and the intro was, well, let's just say they're no longer in production because it just took so long. And I was listening to it, and no offense, but I really wanted to just stick a needle in my eye because it was just
like War and Peace.
Boring, you know, it was. And then the host came in, and then there was so much banter and fluff. Now, unless your audience likes banter and fluff, you don't want to have that, because one of the things I say, you cannot mix a compelling episode or compelling content from boring banter and fluff. Especially, this show's all about building your business, building your brand. So you need to be on. What are people going to walk away with, or you know, through listening to the podcast? What are they going to take away? I always introduce that, a bit like what you did. Ask a question, you know, or come in with something that is really poignant to what people are talking about. Then share a little bit about the things that are going to be covered, introduce your guest if it's a guest, and then just, you know, kind of dive straight into the content.
And I think one of the things that people listen to podcasts for is because they're curating their own content. So they want to go and listen to something in particular. So they don't want to listen to the radio where the announcer rabbits on forever and just talks about rubbish. And I know, I just don't even listen to the radio anymore. It just drives me absolutely insane. These people just talking about nothing and thinking that they're funny and that everybody wants to hear that. So I think that's really another reason why podcasting is growing, because people still want to listen, they still want to learn, but they actually want to hear from someone that they know, value and trust, and they know they're going to get the outcome that they want. So yes, I want to listen to something where I'm going to learn about how to build my brand. So I'm going to go searching for that, and I want to hear that in the first couple of seconds of listening to that podcast. I want to hear this ramble on, and there's a lot of, I know for me personally, like I listen to a lot of podcasts, and especially the American ones, oh my God, they waffle on for ages in their intro, and then it becomes like an ad fest, and it's like listening to the radio again, and it's something that just puts me off straight away, and I go on to the next one. I'm like, I find another one because I just want to get to the information.
The information's important as well. Okay, so the intro is important, the name's important. What about the music that you use for your podcast?
Very important.
Do you know what you get all?
Creates an experience. You know, someone asked me the other day, how can I increase my listeners? How can I increase my subscribers? And I said to her, well, first, because it's all touch points, first you have to have a good name for your podcast, because it's going to, like one of my podcasts was called Women in Leadership. I'm not going to be talking about cooking on women in leadership, unless, of course, the person I'm interviewing is a chef and really high, in the leadership role. So once you've identified that, you've got kind of the music and the intro. Now, once you've gone past that, then you've got the intro of the show and what they're going to learn. So once you've got past that, and when I mean got past that, you've maintained their attention, then you've got to share that content. And every step along that way, if you're not compelling and engaging and bringing them forward, they'd let, like what Melanie was saying, I'm gone and I'm listening, finding another podcast episode. That's the way you do it. Every single piece, every component of that episode
needs to engage.
To lead that listener to remain listening. And not only that, it was such a good show. I'm subscribing to this because I wanted to binge listen to every other episode and have all the other episodes that are coming in the future.
With music too, it's really important to have a look at, there's a whole lot of sites at the moment. You've got stock photos, you've also got stock music as well. Stock music can be quite expensive, but there's also a number of sites where it can be free or it can be a lot cheaper as well. So really have a look at the different sites of stock music to choose what's right for you. And I know that I must have spent, when I did it for this show, I must have spent about 4 hours going through a whole lot of stock music here and there before I chose the music for it. So you really need to have a look at what connects you and connects your show to that song or that music as well. Sorry, Mel, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, have a listen to the podcast you listen to, and then just take note of those things, like what's the intro like, what's the music like, how long are they taking to get to the point, and, is there a common denominator for you that you like, and then try and weave that into yours, because if you are an engaged listener of those podcasts, then, you're usually attracting, people that are similar to you or been on that journey, and then, that they're going to like, your intro and then your music, etc., and resonate with it. And I think it's all part of attracting the right people to you, is, the music that you like and resonates with you, then they will be attracted to it too. So go back and think about what you like and some other podcasts that you like, and then just take note, and then go find the right music for yourself.
So it's really twofold in the way that you're attracting the right customers or the right clientele or the right people listening to your podcast, but you're also speaking your brand with it as well.
Yeah. And it's a production. Like, I think as we're talking, I think people are kind of getting the feel for, this is a production. Like, your podcast isn't just something that you go, oh, I'm just going to start a podcast. There's all these, there's all these elements you've got to think of. And if you do all of those right, then you're going to be ahead of the game of all the other podcasters, just like, I'm just going to stand in front of a microphone and talk.
And there is a lot to think about.
Yeah, and we know that from, different TV shows. Like, there's some TV shows that, are done really well and you'll always watch them. And then there's some that it's like, oh, it's like a car crash and like, you're not going to watch that. So, podcasting is the same. And so if you want to be at a certain level and attract people, then, you just need to put a bit of time and effort and thought into it. And if you get all that right, then, it's a lot easier to keep going on that podcasting journey.
Very, very true. Now, I just have to interrupt and say this is amazing.
While you're eating,
I know, it looks nice.
I'll put this down.
Put it down.
I was going to say, just be mindful of that, because sometimes I've done this, because I use some of those berries in like, you know, a shake, and you whiz it up, and then here I am on a live smiling, and then I realize I got one of the berries in my teeth. So just what we'll let you know.
Ladies, please tell me if I have any berries in my teeth at all.
No spinach or berries, it's all right.
It's absolutely delicious. I will say this one more time what it is. It's called an Eaten Mess, which is frangelico soaked berries with smashed meringue and vanilla whipped cream, and it's absolutely delicious. And I just have to say that the meal I just had, which was the lamb shoulder seasoned with white wine, celery, onion, carrot and rosemary, together with roasted vegetables in olive oil with sweet potatoes and red pepper, is also amazing. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I have to, I think, make sure all my guests have food next time too. But yeah, Mel, eat your roast vegetables, please.
Dig in.
I wanted
my son enjoyed my dinner. Just while you're eating that, Deb, one of the things that I do with my clients is I have a system that I'm licensed in. It's a branding with archetypes. And so that really does allow someone to understand the kind of ambience and the kind of experience they want to create. And I'm working with someone at the moment. We've just created her podcast series, and she's selecting music, and she is her combination of archetypes are hero and nurturer. So whilst, you know, the hero is a champion of others, they stand up, and, you know, she is quite edgy at times. And so the music she selected was quite heavy, if that's, you know, and so quite loud. And I said, have one more listen just to see, because obviously when you're editing and mixing, there's going to be, right at the beginning, there's going to be some elements that you then have to weave in, you know, her words when she speaks them. But again, that's her, and so people will know that she's edgy, and so she's not going to have, you know, soft angelic kind of music, because that's just not her. So
well, it's funny you say that, because when I did the music for this, I also wanted it more edgy. I didn't want it really quiet or something like that. I wanted it more out there as well. So yeah.
And you've got to be careful with loud music at the beginning, because you don't want to blow out the eardrums of the audience.
Especially if they're on the train and they're like, whoa.
Exactly. If they're driving, cause an accident on the Monash. That's not a good thing.
Well, you'll have to listen to it and tell me at another time what you think. Okay, let's talk about call to action. What types of call to action can we put at the end of a podcast?
Well, there's heaps, as you know, with all your other marketing and how you're funneling people to you currently without a podcast. But I think the first and foremost is, as you get going in your podcast, it's about building trust and people getting to know you. So, you know, we always say to our clients is, you know, don't go in there with a full-on pitch to start with, because people don't know who you are. So it's like a slowly approach. When we talk to guests, it's like, you know, you're going on to appear on someone else's podcast. It's not a sales pitch. They're getting to know you. And so that's what you're doing on your podcast. You're allowing people to get to know you. They're learning a bit about you. They're learning about what you know. They're seeing if they connect with you or resonate with you. And then as you take them on that journey, and again, this is where the outcome comes back to it, is, you know, if you know the outcome that you want to achieve and the journey, then you will curate your content to take them on that journey, and that you can, you know, sprinkle in little offers along the way, but you're not going, you know, punching them in the face, you know, as soon as you start your podcast to say, hey, buy this. You know, it's a get to know you. It's similar to when you meet someone, you don't say, hey, buy my product. As soon as you meet them, you introduce yourself and say who you are, and they get to know you, and, you know, you go on that journey together. So, I would just say slowly.
Very, very true. Okay, so we've done call to action. Let's have a look at planning your content. Now, I know you mentioned, Mel, also about planning your content months in advance to know the journey that your listener is going on. So go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. again, when you know the end in mind, then you can work out your content and you can map it out and plan it out. And we've got, a couple of tools to help people do that, because a lot of people come in and think, what am I going to talk about? Like, I don't have enough information to talk about to fill up a podcast. That's some of their concern. But actually, once you start extracting stuff from them, they've got so much content they could talk forever. And it's about just putting that in a plan that makes sense, and you're creating a journey with that content. And then think about what you're doing in your business. So do you have any launches coming up? Are you writing a book? Is something happening where you want to take them on the journey with you? So know what you're doing in your calendar. How does your content fit around that? But also then you can, plan out and record 1, 2, 3 months in advance, so that you're not thinking, oh my God, I've got a podcast coming up and I've got to record someone, or I've got to book a guest or do an interview. You've got all that ahead of the game. So you're working ahead, and it's not a stress, and you're enjoying the process, and then you'll want to keep going and keep doing it.
Annemarie?
Yeah, great. All very important. And I think what's really good when you have a look at an overall plan of your year, it keeps you accountable and it makes you plan. I mean, how many businesses kind of go, well, whatever, but if you've got an idea of when you're launching different products, again, you can look at, well, what podcast episodes can I launch before that date? And people are doing that really well, where they're providing case studies and they're providing information that really speaks into a challenge that they know they're going to provide a solution for, more information. So when the call to action might be, well, come to this, intensive, or come to this webinar that I'm running on that date, that people that you've nurtured in those subsequent podcast episodes before that date, they'll have interest in it and then go and sign up. But an overall, we talked about strategy, and that really is, again, looking at your overall podcast, looking at your different episodes so that it adds value. But I have a formula that I stumbled across when I had Women in Leadership podcast, and that was really a passion project for me, because it was back in 2015. I had a 7-figure pipeline partnership, and it crumbled down. I'm not going to go into why all that happened, but that was the biggest, worst failure that I'd ever had. And I could not create anymore. We'd taken 18 months to build this incredible business. But subsequently, I started Women in Leadership podcast, because I thought, you know what? I can't write, I can't create content, but I can ask really good questions. So I'm going to go out and find incredible women who have been through the lowest of lows and now have gone, and really developed success and leadership and business and career. I want to interview them. They didn't know at the time that I was healing, through this failure. And 3 episodes in, I got 2 4-figure clients, and that was a podcast that I created as a way to deal with my situation. And at that time I thought, wow, now if I could do that by accident. These people heard they Googled business consultant, brand consultant, came to my website, listened to the 3 episodes where I was interviewing someone, and then they rang me and they said, well, we love what you do, we've checked out your website, how do we work with you, what's the best program, how can we do that? And I thought, now if I could do that by accident, imagine if I mapped out the steps and then recreated that and developed a system and a process that enabled that to happen on an ongoing basis. So it's taken me about 3 years to map that out, what I've done. And that's now what I teach others. So the call to action is, this is what I say to people, before you start your podcast, the first 3 episodes have to be on your thought leadership. You need to understand your customer journey, because if you give a customer journey, it's awareness, consideration, and decision. So awareness are your episodes. It's everything that you're doing to communicate your brand. You lead people into the next step, which is consideration, which is your podcast series. It's your call to action. It's your list builder. And obviously there's strategy within how to create that. But that means at the end of every single podcast, whether you're being interviewed on someone else's, whether you're speaking from stage, whatever, the call to action is, well, if you like this, I've only scratched the surface. Sign up for my free podcast series. There's some other goodies in there as well, but we really dive a lot deeper into what I couldn't cover today. Here's the link. bang, people will be going there because they've loved your content so much, they want to spend more time with you. Now, over the years, I've done a bit of research too, and I've asked people this and got feedback, and they've really validated this. Now, people who listen to podcasts love listening to podcasts. They're listening to podcasts because they like that medium. So when you are communicating with someone and you're doing a call to action, try and remember that you want to give the content or the next step in the same mode of communication that someone is absorbing and, you know, engaging with that. So often what I hear a call to action is, I'll get an ebook or go and watch my video series. Well, guess what? People are listening to audio because they like audio. So don't give them a huge long book or ebook that they have to read, because they just won't. And so that's why a really nice podcast series can be added, and that becomes the formal outro in every single podcast that you know, that we create. So and that's why we can say start to nurture listeners into leads, inquiries, and paying clients from your first episode, because you're always bringing people back to the first and second and then third episode, which is dedicated to your thought leadership.
I think that's so important what Annemarie was just talking about, because the aim of the podcast is to get them, yes, you want them to subscribe, but you also want them to be on your list. So you want to get them over into your, you know, mailing list, newsletter, so that you can, you know, send them whatever you want to send them and whatever call to action. So then your podcast just becomes, come and listen to my podcast series, or the first step where they can become your client. And then you don't have to keep having a different call to action on your podcast. It's one thing, and then you take them off that, and the funnel is separate to your podcast. Then it doesn't become a sales pitch. It's still you adding value, which is what you want to do.
Yeah. I call that the podcast profit pipeline, because there's a whole lot of different steps, but it's beautiful because it's just a natural, you know, next step, because someone's enjoyed the experience listening to you, even if they're being, you know, if you're being interviewed, you're being interviewed on someone else's podcast, which means listeners love listening to that podcast. And that's why we say call to action with a podcast series is great. It's free, but if someone signs up for that, that means they're interested. So they're a warm lead. I'm interested and I want that content. And that works really well. And yeah, sure, if you've got other things that are coming up, switch that out. But that really is the strategy that I now teach and use. And I stumbled across that because I thought, well, if, you know, someone's listened to 3 episodes where I'm only hanging out and asking the questions, imagine if I'm, you know, sharing expertise. Something else that I got some feedback from a client who, this is the one that we're just putting her series together. She listened to a couple of episodes of a new podcast that she just started subscribing to, and she wanted to know more about that host. But what happens is that host had, even her episode, I call it episode 0, had no information about who that host was, what services or what, you know, how she could work with her. And so many podcasters don't do that. And people are listening to that. And that's another saying I have. People come for the topic, they return for the host. So they could listen to that topic to a million other different podcast episodes because they're talking about that particular episode. They'll find it and then they go, you know what, I really love that. I love listening to what Melanie was saying. Oh, Deb was hilarious. Love the way she integrates that. They'll come back because they love the experience that you create. And so that's what you have to be mindful of.
True, very true. I like that. Thanks for that, Annemarie. Just before we continue, I just want to find out from Nikki if we have any more comments, or let's have a look. Okay. Are we getting Nikki on? Okay, she'll come on when she comes on. Nope.
I think she's dropped off again on the Zoom.
Yeah, she had dropped off, but I said to her that she can come back on. I don't know why she keeps dropping out tonight. All right, we'll continue on. I will have a look. Okay, hold on. Oh no, she's back. Hello?
No, I'm here.
You need to turn the computer on mute. Not this one, the show.
I'm here.
Any comments or questions at all, Nikki?
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but you need to put the other one on mute because I can hear me in the background.
Okay.
Not this one.
Here we go.
Cool.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. How you going?
Good, darling. Any comments or questions at all?
We've got a comment from Caroline Barton. She says, thanks for the discussion around suggested podcast length and what we need to think about.
Our pleasure.
Awesome.
And David Sparks said, Melanie, you are so right about the waffle.
There's two of us, David.
we all agree. We all agree. Fantastic. Anyone else, Nick?
No, that's all for now, and I'll
Cool.
keep you posted with any more.
Thank you.
All right, done. Okay.
Bye.
A good tip is that if there is a topic that you want to listen to on a podcast, you can listen to podcasts on 1.5 speeds and double speeds. And I often do. And in fact, that you've also got a little, a lot of people don't know this, but you're welcome. When I was shared this, there's an add-on to Chrome that you can speed up videos. Now, I was watching someone's webinar.
It's like listening to the Chipmunks.
Double speed. And I get really concerned when it's double speed and I'm still listening to them like it's normal. And I'm thinking, I don't know what this person would be like on normal speed. It must
You
be.
couldn't listen to them, could you?
No. So that's a good thing. If someone waffles, you can.
Yeah, fast forward.
So is it like, I guess it's not then like listening to the Chipmunks.
It's not that bad, but it's obviously a little bit quicker, but it's, yeah. Because as I said, I cannot listen to people who are slow talkers. My attention wanes. So
That's fair enough.
yeah. I once listened to, and I think I mentioned to you, Melanie, it might have been before we went live. I listened to a podcast host once answer a question, which should have just been a straight yes or no. And I wanted to just time him. And it took over 50 minutes because he validated this point and validated that point. And
Was he a politician?
no, he wasn't.
Wow.
I thought,
I'm amazed you lasted all that time.
I know.
and just see how long it goes for.
I'm amazed you lasted all that time, Annemarie.
Well, we were driving out in the country or something. That, you know what?
Full time.
Enjoying the nature. This was, a number of years ago now.
That's all right.
That would be a record.
Emailed me and said, I get this constantly. Thank you for not being fluff and bubble, fluff and banter, because, people, especially, and again, this really does require you to understand your ideal client and what their expectations. I remember a couple of years ago, we were being interviewed, and someone else who was involved with one of the unis here was very much into podcasting as well. And some of the shows that she would listen to really had no end. They would just get on and chat about anything, sometimes for 2 hours or more. And that long form podcast was increasing in popularity. Maybe there's some lonely people out there that just love rambling in the background. I don't know. Again, who's your ideal client?
Who's your audience? Exactly. Who's your audience? Now, I wanted to have a chat about focusing content and repurposing it. So the different places where you can repurpose content.
Yeah, awesome. This is an awesome question because what you're doing in the podcast is that you are creating content as you speak. So how cool is that? Like, you could be interviewing someone or talking about a topic or doing a Q&A, questions that have come in from your network or audience, and you could be answering them on your podcast. You then can transcribe that into text. You can create that text into a newsletter, a blog, social media snippets. You can take an audiogram file and create that and put that on social media. From a podcast episode, you can create about 20 pieces of collateral that you can then go and post. And there's probably, you could create more, depending on the length of the episode. If it's an interview, it's probably a lot more than that. But all of that can be posted on social media, and the magic is to keep posting it. So do it persistently and be consistent as well. So, you know, your topic that you talk about on a podcast could be relevant, you know, a month, 2 months, 3 months down the track. There's no reason why you can't post again about a podcast topic. So don't think, oh, I've released that, I can't talk about it again. So yes, you've released it and it's an episode of your podcast, but you can put it back on social media.
Always talk about it again.
It might be topical. Something might have happened, you know, or you might be getting questions from your audience or your clients on a particular topic, and you're like, I did a podcast on that. I'm going to post it again and say something about it to get people to listen to it again. So all this content that you're creating, you need to be using that and posting consistently on multiple platforms, because I think there was a stat, something about you need to be seen on 4 platforms 11 times. There's a formula anyway about how many times people need to see and hear from you before they'll build up
about 11
to do something with you. So if you're taking that from your podcast and posting on all these different platforms and you're doing that consistently, then you're top of mind when people are talking about, you know, branding, for example, or something that they're like, oh, I heard from Deb and I need to go and find her now, you know, because I've got a question on that, or I'm ready to engage someone to help me on that. And you will always be top of mind because you're out there consistently in different places.
Mel, you mentioned repurpose it into show notes. What does that mean?
So from a podcast, show notes is really just the text. So taking the spoken word and transcribing that into text. There's
like
lots
a blog.
Lots of tools and things that can do that. Even like Google Docs and things, you can do a translate. It's not very good. Some people like it. It works for some people. Some people are it's not very accurate. But there's tools like rev.com and things like that where you can get it
as well.
Yeah, and there's lots of AI bots now popping up and how you can do that. And then you take that and then you can, you know, create a blog post from it. You can create a newsletter. You can create social media snippets. All that kind of stuff can come from the text. And usually with a podcast, you have the show notes and you have all the links and everything to your guest, for example, or to your website. And a lot of people like to just go there because if they are driving or they're doing something else, they might just go, oh, I wanted to go and see what that website was that they mentioned on that podcast, and they can go and quickly refer to it.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting about the show notes, I just yesterday, actually, was it yesterday or the day before, I was doing a little bit of research for my newsletter and I stumbled across someone who'd I've listened to their podcast previously, and I knew that they were credible in what they did and what they said they were in copywriting. And in one of the episodes that he had a link to the Hemingway app. And I was listening to the podcast. He said, this is fantastic. I listened to it. And you know what? I went and bought it straight away and I'm using it. I'm loving it. There's something about the trust that you build as a host that when you start recommending things that you have used and really have loved, it just instantly builds that rapport and that trust with the guest, or maybe it's the listener, maybe it's just me. The amount of books that have been mentioned on a podcast, I think, you know, if I had shares in Kindle, I would, let me just say that. So, you know, so there's something really to be said about the engagement that you have, and when you are always offering value, like we've been saying right the way through, you know, when you do have that call to action and that ideal person is ready to make that decision because you've been in their world and you're top of mind, they will, you know, ultimately reach out and go, okay, I'm ready, you know. Yeah.
Too true. Okay, so we talked about also marking the calendar and using your podcast for launches as well. So it could be also too, you could have products for Mother's Day or Father's Day or whatever may come too. You also mentioned to make sure of, you know your content and know who you're having on for the next 12 months. That can change a little bit. I actually, in December, I wrote a 12-month calendar for this show. So I know who I wanted, I know when I wanted them. And then I'm really glad in the very beginning, in January, February, March, I actually did it show by show, because March show was totally different to what I thought it would be in December. I didn't think I would be doing a show on coronavirus and getting your business through it. So, yeah. So
who knew?
Yeah, who knew? So everything slightly changed a bit. So even though I know the shows I want to have on until the end of the year. I've actually decided to organise them now month by month because some things have been changing, which have made it a little bit, that a different show that I thought it would be better on than not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but that's the beauty of having a plan, is that,
true.
you know, you can change it and you know when you can reschedule something. So it might be topical. Obviously, coronavirus is topical at the moment. So it makes sense to, you know, have a show on that because that's what everybody's thinking about. And then you can push the other ones back. It's with you when you have guests and things like that, you know, particularly people that are hard to get on shows where you might have to just work around that, but at least you've got your content mapped out. You know what you want to do. You just may need to reorder some of that, but that's easily done rather than thinking about the whole next 12 months.
Yeah, that would be crazy. No, I totally agree with you. It's a lot easier looking in my notebook going, okay, so I've done that one, that one, and which one do I want to do next? Because it's sitting there and it's planned out. So planning does help in a lot of ways. That's for sure. We would talk. Sorry?
If you've got some major launches, you know, because you've got some programs that you want to run, then you can look at those main dates. I mean, if I think of, the intensive that we run, we do them once a quarter. Now, we may do that with a bit more frequency now, but I know leading up to that, there are certain episodes that I want to talk about that builds kind of a bit of intensity around that people are going, that's right. Now, even if I had shows, and I've seen this happen before, and I've done this as myself, if you've got shows booked, and when I say booked, they're already recorded and they're scheduled, well, there's nothing stopping you from popping in and doing a 10, 15-minute solo show where you add that. So you're actually adding an extra show. One of the things that I decided to do this year is I'm not numbering my shows when I interview, because I've had where I've swapped. So previously live, because I record all of my podcasts live. Welcome to episode 379. Well, I don't do that now. I just go, welcome to this another episode, and I add the episode number, you know, on when we release it. So yeah, there's just, again, the strategy. I might change that because that's the pro. The con, of course, is that I can't now at the end of the show say, so if you want to go to the show notes, go to episode, you know, Industry Thought Leader podcast.com/47 or whatever. I can't do that. But it's better for me to not number it live, because then my team can shift around if we need to.
You can add it on as an image.
Yes, but at the end of the show, I can't say go to this if you want to, you know. But what the call to action is I don't really care if they go to the show notes or not. I want them to get off the podcast and onto my list or become part of my community. There's other aspects that I want them to take as that call to action. Yeah.
Now that brings me to the next point, which is building your email list off your podcast. So is the best way to tell them exactly where to go to put their email address in afterwards? What is the best way to build that email list using your podcast?
Well, if I have used the podcast series, that will be the call to action. What I've also done, and I've seen this done with other podcast hosts too, I've got a couple of shows. One of them is, you know, that opportunity that is in front of you, is that an opportunity or is it a distraction? So I talk about that in the podcast. But what I've created a number of years ago, which was really a tool that I created for myself, was a checklist. And there's 7 or so different questions that I ask myself. And if any of those are no, especially 2 right at the end, then this is not an opportunity, it's a distraction. I created it because as entrepreneurs, we're all over the place.
So what type of questions would you ask yourself? Sorry, Annemarie.
Well, you know, is it aligned with my vision and my mission? Is it aligned with my 90-day goal or my 30-day goal? And it goes kind of, you know, down that. Is it a sidetrack? So there's a whole lot of different questions. But what I've said at the end of that episode, if you want to download the checklist and the infographic, go to this link and then you can subscribe. And we've actually created a squeeze page where people can add their name and email address in the post. So that's another little lead builder, or lead generation for us, list builder for us.
And when you say in the post, in the
show notes, yeah, in the show notes on the website, when we release the podcast episode, yeah.
Fantastic. Sorry, Mel, you wanted to add something there?
Yeah, so again, it was like we were talking about the podcast being at the top of the funnel. Then it's a journey to get to know you. If they want to know more, you can direct them somewhere, to your website, to an opt-in, to another podcast series, whatever makes sense for your business and it's part of your strategy. But the ideal scenario is that they go and do something with you directly rather than stay on your podcast. So whatever that is, and you'll know what works with your particular audience, is that you want to, take them over there. The other thing that I'll just mention that we haven't touched on, Deb, I don't know whether you've got this question, is just around the frequency of posting podcasts.
Right.
And I think that's important too, because a lot of people have a podcast and they'll do it monthly. And if you've got a listener, you want to hear from your podcast host more often. So there's a different criteria that we look for when we're looking to match hosts and guests. But ideally is weekly. Fortnightly okay, monthly, not so good, because once you get a listener, they want to hear from you more often. So you want to make sure that you're giving them enough information. You're not bombarding them. It's people that do podcasts daily, which I think is crazy. Or 2 to 3 times a week. They haven't got a life.
How many times are you doing them, Annemarie? We love you.
So weekly is a good rhythm to get into. If you can do fortnightly when you're starting, monthly it's too long between episodes because people want to hear from you more often. So just keep that in mind too, about how often and how frequent are you going to be posting your podcast.
And also depending on your audience as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't do a daily one because you'll blow out your downloads.
How often?
You'll go crazy.
How often? And everything.
How often are you doing them?
Well, now it's weekly, but one of the podcasts, and at that time I was producing 3 of my own, and then I had about 4 or 5 that I was producing for alliance partners, and some weeks I was interviewing up to 26 people, all live. But you know what was really good is because it was a great test, because everything that I now teach, we put that system through fast testing, so that I didn't have to do any of the work other than show up and interview people. So we can say we put our systems through the ringer. Literally.
That's how you know what works and what doesn't work, by doing that as well. So
stress testing.
That's exactly right.
At the end of the day, I was like this to my family. I cannot talk anymore.
And everything would have melded into one, and everyone would have melded into one as well.
Who am I talking to now?
What's this about?
Now, I want to ask you in regards to tools. I want to do a podcast. What do I use? What do I do? I now know the content. I now know my strategy. I now know how many times I'm going to produce it, how long it's going to be. What tools do I use?
So I'm going to keep it really simple, because that's me. I love keeping it simple.
Best, Melanie. What she's wearing on her...
I've got my free headphones that came with my iPhone. I plug them into my laptop. I put on Zoom.
It works.
And I press record. Yeah. And make sure you press record, because I've done that a few times. I've started a podcast and then forgot to record it. So
you can actually pre-record. You can press record when you're setting it up.
Yes,
so that way if you forget, it doesn't matter.
I do that now because I learnt my lesson big time. I've done that a few times, so never again.
So you're doing your podcasting via Zoom?
Absolutely. I use Zoom.
You are too, Annemarie, aren't you?
The other people know how to use Zoom too. You're not having to educate them on another piece of software or a tool to make it harder for them. You want to make it as easy and seamless as possible for your guest if you're interviewing. And Zoom is the easiest way to do that. Everyone's kind of au fait.
So you've basically done like a double dipper. You're doing, whether people want to watch it in video or if people want to watch it in a podcast way, they can do both.
So that's right. You can use your video as well. And that's one of the things that you can do is post in your video in YouTube. So YouTube is the second biggest search engine after Google. So, you know, if people are looking for something, they'll go looking and it'll come up, you know, Google and then YouTube. So you can have your podcast posted on YouTube as well if you want to use the video. Some people don't like to do that, but you can have slides or different things that go on in YouTube, so you still have a presence there. And you can do your you know, your translation into text while the video is going as well, because Google likes text as well. So there's different ways that you can do that, but I like to use Zoom and the video to see people when I'm talking to them and interviewing them. I don't use the video, I just use the audio file and have that as a podcast, but I could use the video if I wanted to.
Okay, and Annemarie, you're using both, aren't you?
I am. And, you know, one of the things that people really get stuck on is technology. And look, you don't need fancy, you know, technology. Use the microphone that you have. And as you continue to evolve, then you can look at more expensive microphones and things. This one that I'm using, I mean, I've had expensive ones that have cost me, you know, over $600, $700, $800, right down to this one I actually found under the stairs. I'm actually writing a post. I don't know whose it is because my original one just wasn't working, but I found this under the stairs and I Googled it to see, you know, what kind of quality is fantastic. $47 from JB Hi-Fi. But what I was saying, like finders keepers, I don't know whose it is in my family.
It's yours now.
So I'm thinking I'm going to have a whole lot of people ask me for $47 from JB. What is it called?
It's called a Shure. Oh, I need my glasses, Deb.
Sorry, Dal.
Q7, Samsung, not sure, beg your pardon. Samsung Q7. I've never used Samsung.
Samsung Q7.
Other than this one.
You heard it from the podcasting queen.
Rode I've used. I had a Behringer for a while. That was the one, I mean, I've had that one for years. Because some of the more expensive ones are so touchy, and me, like I can be like talking normally and all, because you know one of my core values is fun, so I could be roaring with laughter. So if I've got a really sensitive microphone, again, I'm going to blow the eardrums.
Definitely.
So I've got to be careful, and I don't want to have my team go through everything and, you know, minimize Annemarie's laughter.
And I think the only thing you probably need to just, you know, think about is where are you recording and where is your guest.
So you're telling me a train station is not okay?
No, unless they've got headphones and a noise cancelling microphone and stuff, you know, that is not a good place. So there's different microphones that you can use if you're going and, you know, like if you're doing a travel podcasting, for example, and you're interviewing people, you know, on the road or something, then you would obviously, you know, invest in a microphone for doing that. But if you're just, you know, in an office and you're guest is in an office, then you don't need to get too fancy. It's really, the quality of it is just stick your headphones in your laptop. So if your guest is a bit not in an environment that you know, might be a bit echoey, as long as they've got headphones that they can plug into their laptop, that just makes a whole lot of difference. So you don't have to get
clutter is a really good thing to have in a room.
A what?
Like clutter.
Oh.
Because it absorbs
noise.
The right kind of clutter. It absorbs the sound waves. And, you know, so put mats down. I mean, there's a microphone, but I've got this one that's on a stand, but I've got like a mat, and it just absorbs, because sometimes, you know, when I get a little bit charismatic, I'll knock things. I've taken jewelry off, you know, and watches, because, you know, sometimes the hands go flying. You've got to think of all these things, because that will knock. I've got one client who wears a lot of jewelry.
Cutlery for dinner.
You know, and so you've got to go and edit that out. Otherwise you'll hear clanging in the background. So these are all things that you've got to keep mindful.
Just an added thing in regards to the microphones too, depending on where you are and what you're doing is really important. Like even for business dining with Deb, like over Zoom, I actually don't even have a microphone put in at the moment because I'm using my computer's microphone. When I host a dinner party, I actually have with me, I've got lapel microphones, but the lapel microphones, I don't have enough for as many guests that you can actually plug into a phone. And the more you plug into a phone, the less, the more static noise there is as well. So you've got to be careful of that. So I'll have a lapel microphone like right up near somebody and another one near somebody else in between us, so we can actually utilize it that way. So you also have the microphones that will sit on the table, but I had to be careful with that, because if not, you would have heard every single time someone put a fork and knife down, you would have heard that too. So you need to have a look at where you are in order for the microphone that you're using. So I've got no one else here at the moment, so using my microphone on my computer is fine, not a problem at all. So it depends on how many people, it depends on how you've got it plugged in and what you're doing, depending on the microphone that you do have. Does it sit on the table and collect all the noise, or is it only like the lapel one, just the mouth? And so if it's too far, we can't hear anything. So all these things that you really need to think of. With the tools, it's great that people can keep it simple. People don't realize that, you know, apart from this is being recorded on Zoom, but when I do it, when I host a dinner party at home and I'm recording the show, I just have my phone on a tripod. That's it.
Yeah.
With the lapel microphones plugged in.
Yeah, just something that I've seen, and I would seriously look at getting this, and I noticed someone had one, but you can get these foam boards even from like Clark Rubber or something like that. But I've seen these little, they're called, I'm just looking, they're called isolation shields, and it's like a little square that you can put your microphone in. And you can get them off Amazon, but they're called like an isolation box, a vocal booth, but they absorb the sound. So you put your microphone in there, and so you speak into that. Now, of course, if you're doing a live or if you're doing something like you're doing, you might not be able to do it. But if you've got it low enough that you can't see it in the, you know, the screen, that could certainly be an option, because what happens is the sound's not reverbing off the walls and windows and things. You don't want to be in a windowed, you know, room. You want to have some carpet on the floor, you know, that kind of thing, something that absorbs the sound waves, you know.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is you want it not to be distracting for your listener. So the best way, whatever you can do to make it less distracting, like it's never going to be perfect all of the time, but, you know, if you can make it as good as you can, don't get caught up too much in it. Just, you know, keep going, add to your toolbox as and when you need it. You'll get to know what works, what doesn't. But yeah, just, you know, the less distractions for your listeners, then they'll keep wanting to listen. Because if you have distractions, sometimes people are like, oh, I can't listen to this anymore, it's driving me crazy.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough too. The next question I want to ask you guys is, when you're actually doing you put together, so actually I'm going to say, let's say it from the show, okay, from this. So I want to pull the audio off these and put them into a podcast. How do you feel about that?
Yeah.
All good so far? Now, my question to you is this. Now, I know that a podcast has to sit somewhere. It has to be hosted somewhere. And then, and I could have this wrong, and then from the hosting, it goes on to places like Spotify or your iMusic or places like that. Is that how it works on the back end?
Yeah, absolutely. So you got hosting like Omni Studio, you know, there's a whole lot of platforms that you can put it on, and then they will push it out to all the various platforms. So Annemarie can probably talk a little bit more about that. I don't get too technical on that side.
So Annemarie, what you go on? Sorry, Mel.
No, it's all right. Annemarie can, probably add bit to that.
And look, there are so many different hosts that are being added to, obviously, the podcast hosting. One of the things that I'll often say to my clients is just to be mindful about who they choose. I've always used Blueberry, and that's a paid subscription. And the reason why I prefer that is because some of the free platforms, they monetize their ability to offer it free by adding ads to content. And as Melanie was saying, podcast listeners don't typically like ad after ad after ad. But from a brand point of view, I want to retain ownership and control over what ad is being added to my, you know, podcast. In fact, I don't want ads added to my podcast. And so just be mindful of that also too. I mean, I have heard it once, it was a number of years ago now, where a free podcast host just wasn't able to maintain their business anymore. So podcasters had to scramble to get all of their content off and then obviously uploaded to another host. Okay. And so I always prefer to use, but there's Libsyn. I haven't used that myself, so I can't give feedback, but I know a lot of other people who use that service. Some clients have gone to SoundCloud because Blueberry typically works with WordPress. It's got a beautiful little plug-in that sits at the back called PowerPress, and that then once you get that set up, when you publish your podcast on a post on your blog, it pushes out to all of the platforms that you've sent your podcast to. So for me, it includes Apple, Pandora. Oh, there's so many I can't.
Yeah.
But
so do you choose those ones, or it just pushes it out to all of them?
Well, when you set up your podcast, you have to get that all set up. So, but once you've done that, you then don't have to worry about it. But what often will happen is, like the other day, I found one of my older podcasts on a host that I didn't even know, because sometimes what they do is they pull content as well to populate content. Anyway, that's fine. But again, be mindful about where your content ends up, because when someone listens to your content and someone's added an ad unbeknownst to you, they will assume, that listener, that you validated and that you know that and so again, it depends on, on what your message is, and you could all of a sudden have an ad that you would not necessarily promote to your audience. So.
And I think this is those kind of questions are good if you're part of a community. So we run Melbourne Podcasters Group. We just had our online webinar because, we're all in isolation, so we're going online. But we've got a group and a Facebook page, and it's really good questions to ask the community, because some people are really into it, like the technology side, and they'll really love knowing the latest software and the latest microphone, but they'll also know things like, how do you post it and which one are you using? And people will come on and say, oh, I'm using this one because it's better because of A, B, C, D. And so rather than you having to go and research all of this stuff, you can tap into this whole community that knows this stuff and just ask the question. So if you're thinking about doing podcasting, I'd encourage you to go and connect with other people that are doing it and just learn from them too, so you don't have to do it all alone.
So Mel, where's yours hosted?
We use Omni Studio.
Okay.
And then that pushes out to all of the platforms.
And
Brett does all that side of things, the technical. I just give him my file, which is nice.
we all need a Brett.
Yes, we do. Absolutely.
Annemarie, did you say that the WordPress app for Blueberry is called PowerPress? Fantastic. Beautiful. Okay.
Just on that point about, stripping audio, say from a webinar or a live or something like that. Remember though, the context or the purpose that you were creating that original piece of content. Be mindful about what you're doing with it on your podcast. Just like we have social media strategists saying you need to post natively to the expectations and the desires and the likes of your audience on that particular platform, it's similar with a podcast as well. So it doesn't mean you can't do it, but provide a bit of context. So I've had podcast episodes where I have shared where I've been interviewed or I've done a webinar or whatever, but what I do is in the intro, I will just say something like, hey, it's Annemarie, just before we go into this particular episode, just letting you know that it was a webinar that I did the other day or whatever it is, but I provide context. It's valuable for you because of A, B, and C. So keep a note out for that. Now let's get on with the show. And then I integrate that recording. Provide context. Don't just strip audio and upload it to your podcast. Because again, it's you're going to break rapport because people are thinking, well, she's just stripped and, the audio and has just not really given us any reason why we should be listening to this. Does that make sense?
So what type of context in the beginning is good to say?
Well, it depends on obviously what the content is and what kind of things that you want them to keep an eye out for. Give them a bit of context as to what it was. The reason is because if you're thinking about a podcast, people listen. And so if you're there going, well, if you have a look at the screen or if you do this or this, it's just going to break rapport because it's like, I can't see anything. What I do now is when I record all of my podcasts, I'm streaming across 5 different platforms. So I will often say as a reminder, by the way, if you're listening to the audio podcast, you're missing out because we're now also live streaming. Come across to some of the platforms, connect with me so that, if you're able to join us live at you're at
a bit of a multitasker there, are you?
Yeah.
So I think what Annemarie's saying is she's going from podcast to other platforms rather than other platforms to podcast. And that's probably a better way to do it because otherwise you dilute your podcast. And that's where you want people to start the journey and build the trust with you.
So what are the best places to actually have your podcast? So Spotify?
Yes.
All of the main ones, and there's another one I've mentioned today, something about something for Android. I'll get the name for you, Deb, and I'll give you that one.
And what are the other main names?
So there's FM Player, this Spotify, obviously iTunes, and that's the biggest one. But there's so many different ones now. I couldn't name all of them because there's so many, which is why you use the platform, which then pushes it out to
all of them. It makes it a lot easier.
As new ones come in, the platform knows.
We launched a podcast for one of my clients, and we got her on some of the, obviously the major platforms. But then someone says, "Oh, can we also listen to it from?" And I can't remember the name of it, but it was for the Apple Watch. I thought, okay, all right, that's how we do it. And so now, because they want to be able to listen to it from the Apple Watch. So again, where are your audience hanging out? So, and it's just like, there's no point publishing on a platform if your audience is not there,
that's one of the first things I think with anything that people need to do is ask where their audience hangs out, because that's where they should be marketing or doing their social media or doing their podcasting or their video shows. Where are your customers hanging out? Really important. So I'm just going to find out, do we have any comments or any questions from Nikki? I don't know why she's been dropping out. Okay. Are we getting Nikki back on? She can hear me via Facebook. All right. Just as she's coming on, she'll probably come on in a moment. Yep, she'll probably come on in a moment. Okay. Just before, as she's coming on, is there anything you guys would like to add? Mel, is there anything you'd like to add at all?
I would just say to people, just have a go. Don't be scared about it. It's like having a conversation with someone. You're just recording it. A lot of people get intimidated. Oh, what's a podcast? What we're going to do. And I just say to people, it's like having a conversation between 2 people. Like, there's just a red button in the corner, but just ignore it. You'll be fine. That's if you're doing interview style. Again, you'll get your rhythm and you'll know what works for you. But you just got to get into action and just start somewhere. And as you go through, you'll improve and you'll get better, like anything that you do. So just give it a go.
True. And just before you give yours, Anne-Marie, we've got Nikki's about to come on. Okay.
Get into action and just start somewhere. And as you go through, that's me again. So just give it a go.
True. And just before you give yours, Anne-Marie, I can see you. Okay, hold on. No.
Deb?
Yeah, you can hear me. Yes, I can hear you. All good.
Hi.
Any comments or any questions?
We've got no comments. We haven't got any questions, but we've got a few tags tonight.
Yeah.
We've got my mum saying hello, Deb.
Hello. The food was amazing. Thank you to you and Hannah.
And she's also tagged Hannah in this as well, and another guest who's eaten the same dinner as well. And they're all saying hello to you guys and saying they're very much enjoying listening.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone who's watched as well. Anne-Marie, is there anything you'd like to add?
if you're using or you're wanting to leverage your podcast as a way to build your business and build your brand, before you press record, have that strategy, really be clear on that, because, you know, just because it's easy to start a podcast, yes, it is, but just because you can doesn't mean you should if you're wanting to get results, because the last thing that you want to have happen is that you become a pod fade statistic, and that is where you come out of the gate, you know, all enthused and you've got episodes lined up, and then all of a sudden, you know, you might be up to episode 26, or maybe like someone that I interviewed up to episode 100 before they realized, oh, this is how I'm going to leverage my podcast. You don't want to be a statistic. And you don't want to tarnish your brand either, because what you're sharing has got no relevance to where you want to position yourself.
No, that's fair enough too. Now, I want to thank my lovely friends, Annemarie Cross and Melanie Colling, for a beautiful night. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have... Oh, hold on. I'm hearing myself. Okay, that's better. Now, if you would like to know more about podcasting, ladies and gentlemen, Melanie Colling is giving our viewers a half-an-hour strategy call that was $197, but now it's only $97 if you mention Business Dining with Deb. And from that strategy session, who knows, the world is your oyster. Now, I also have another. Annemarie has a free intensive on podcasting starting on May the 11th. So just make sure that you put in for that, because that will be pretty amazing as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the link in the comments. So you'll be able to get the link in the comments straight away from that to be able to apply. And if you're watching on YouTube, then it'll be in the description below as well. So a big, big thank you to the lovely Melanie Colling and to the lovely Annemarie Cross. I have been wanting to have you guys on the show for a while, so I'm really, really happy that it's happened, and that it's been a really interesting and informative show as well, because I know I've been the same as other people, wanting to do a podcast and looking at the right way to do it, and just wanting to know. It's one of these things that seems so easy, and really if we keep it simple, it is easy to do, but there are a few things that we need to make sure of, like our strategy and our call to action, and the things that we're actually saying, and making sure that we're lead generating from it too, which is important. So thank you, lovely ladies. And thank you to Nikki for helping with the comments and questions. Thank you so much, sweetheart. Really appreciate it. And thank you to our lovely sponsors for tonight, which is Nikki's lovely mother, Anna, and the lovely Hannah, for the most beautiful, I've gone to dessert first. I'm kind of think I need to go to entree. Now I'm going to go dessert. The beautiful dessert first, with the eaten mess of beautiful berries and meringue and vanilla cream, and to the beautiful lamb shoulder that I had, and the beautiful soup as well. Dinner was absolutely amazing. And I wanted to show how, you know, during COVID-19, that we can have home-cooked meals made with love. That's really beautiful too, to be able to share and to have. My name's Debbie Small, and I'm the founder of Empowerment Point, and I want to thank you for watching Empowerment Point TV. Remember, you can watch more episodes on my YouTube channel, Empowerment Point TV. And if you have any questions at all, or you'd like to get in touch with me, I'm at hello@empowermentpoint, that's POINT.com. And remember, in life and in business, you need persistence and a great sense of humour. So keep moving forward. Thank you, guys. See ya.
Thanks, Deb. Bye, Annemarie.
Bye, Deb. See you, Melanie.